So when you talk about these bailouts, how much is $700 billion? The first major bailout was $700 billion and change, and we've had so many of these since then that we've kind of lost track of just how much money this is. We throw around numbers like trillions as if they were billions. Remember, a trillion is 1,000 billion, and a billion is 1,000 million. You give somebody $1 million a year for 1,000 years, 3 times longer than the country has even existed. And that's a billion. So put in perspective, here's what some of the things the government could have done with just one of the bailouts. I've made a little list here. You could buy 1 million homes at $250,000 each, which would totally change the dynamics of the home industry and bring up home prices quite a bit. It would give the government a hard asset because you actually own these homes. You could have it done through private contractors, basically award people the ability to buy, on average, $250,000 homes, apartment buildings and everything, whether they're big realtors or developers or individuals or whatever. You could loan out the money to buy these homes, and it would help the housing market enormously. Next thing you could do, you give a cash grant to 1 million people of $100,000 each. So you take 1 million people who you think could help the economy or are in particularly hard times or have been laid off through no fault of their own or whatever, give 1 million of them $100,000 each. They then pay down their debt, buy things, and that helps the economy. You could also go to 100,000 small businesses and give them $1 million each, a loan or even a grant. And I'm not saying these are good ideas, by the way. I'm just saying this is an alternative to what we could have done with the money. I don't think we should have done any bailout. But you give 100,000 small businesses $1 million. Small businesses are the biggest employer in the country. Can you imagine? Talk to a small business owner and ask him or her what they would do with $1 million. It's a lot of money, and it's a huge help for them. Most small businesses could double or triple in size. They could bring on all kinds of new employees. They'd be buying things. That would help the economy, and they would actually be doing something productive. You could give $1,000 each to 100 million adults, which is almost all the adults in the country. $1,000 economic stimulus, okay? You could build a $200 million college in all 50 states. So every single 50 states gets a $200 million college. That brings in a lot of revenue. It creates construction. You create something good. You improve our education. So it helps us now and helps us long term because we have better education system. You give a $5,000 bonus to all 2 million members of the armed services. This is a great chance for all the support our troops people to put their money where their mouth is. You have another $1,000 economic stimulus to all 24 million veterans in America. You give a $100,000 grant to each of the 100,000 schools in the U.S. Every single school gets a $100,000 grant to buy new equipment and do whatever the school system feels is sensible. You could buy 2 new Disneylands at $5 billion each, Disneyland-style parks. Not quite as big as Disneyland, but you can get a pretty big amusement park for $5 billion. Put one on each coast or something. You could buy a $700 laptop for every student, worker, and retiree in the country. That's about 50 million people. You buy 50 million people a $700 laptop. Now, I have a feeling that if you went to a laptop manufacturer in America and offered to buy 50 million, you'd get a pretty good deal. You could probably get a pretty good laptop for 700. You can get a decent one now for that. If you buy in bulk, you're getting an even better deal. That adds productivity. All these people who would have computers or an extra computer, they can do things and work and do things that help. You go to those same people and buy every single one of them a $199 iPhone. Again, I think Apple probably would help their sales, and also they'd probably give you a deal so you could get a pretty advanced iPhone and maybe a deal that would help their productivity. You give $30 billion to NASA and go back to the moon. Make plans to begin to go back to the moon. When we did that, we were the country that was looked up to by all across the world, and a lot of great science and a lot of great technology came out of that. You could hire 500 of the top researchers and doctors at $500,000 each a year and give them each $5 million towards their research. So you take the top 500 researchers to research things like cancer and AIDS. 500 of them, you make a Manhattan Project-like system, give them $5 million each for research. Surely we would come out with some great discoveries from that, maybe even a cure to some of the great calamities and diseases and problems of our times. You could give $1 million each to the 535 members of Congress. Maybe that would make them support a bill like this. And then you can give them another $10 million each so that they can award pork projects to their friends. You could do all of these things, and you wouldn't even have spent the money of the first bailout. You'd still have $800 million left. You could put that in a couple lotteries, eight lotteries, and give people $1 million a year for the next 100 years. Are these good ideas? Not necessarily. Is it better than sending it into a black hole void of a so-called toxic debt, nonsense, phony money creation system that ultimately trickles down to a very, very few who get massive and exorbitant bonuses on the backs of the taxpayer? Yeah, I'd rather see this plan. I'd rather see no plan, but I would have rather seen this, at least for one of the bailouts. You want to give them their bonuses, they still have the other 3 or whatever we're at now. If you count the bailout, the other bailout, the mortgage plan, TARP, and all of this, not to mention the printing of new money, which is really double the size of the bailouts, you're looking at a really significant amount. Add up all these things, think about a million homes, and by the way, a lot of this would go back to the government. You buy these homes, they actually own something, so presumably they would eventually get their money back, and you'd have a lot more productivity. So when they say that they're making things more productive, and they want to get more capital back into the system by giving it to Wall Street fat cats, don't buy it. They want to get capital back into the system, you can do it this way, or even much more simply, you just take $700 billion and you award a government contract to the most efficient lending institution. Somebody would create a new one. You could go to many, many qualified government contractors. If they can build space shuttles and aircraft carriers, they can certainly administer a loan portfolio. And you say, here's $100 billion, you are tasked with loaning this to the public. If the truth really is that they want credit flowing and they want more loans given, that's a really simple way to do it. And they don't have to sit and complain later about how they gave all this money and never saw the credit markets loosen. Let the failures fail, and if you really, really think, and I don't necessarily agree, but if you really think that credit flow is something that will help the economy, you could do these kind of plans. Just a thought.